All right, I'm super excited for this. Thanks to New Orleans Poetry Festival for having us. Thank you to my readers. I'm going to keep things short and sweet before we launch into everything. If all of the performers are ready, let me know. We're good to go. Unfortunately, Kyle Carrero Lopez could not be with us tonight due to some sudden events, but we are going to conceptually deal with that. You know, it's a hole within a hole for me, personally speaking. So I'm excited to kind of incorporate that absence into the overall theme of the evening. So that means that we will be kicking things off with Lucas de Lima. And I'm going to read. Lucas de Lima is the author of Wetland from Action Books and Tropical Sacrifice, forthcoming this spring from Birds LLC, a recipient of grants and fellowships from the Charlotte W. Newcomb Foundation, the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, and the Canada Council for the Arts. De Lima holds a PhD from the University of Pennsylvania. Their writing has appeared in Pen Poetry, Poetry Foundation, Boundary 2, Syndicate, Brooklyn Rail, and anthologies pertaining to avant-garde and eco-poetics. So give a warm welcome to Lucas de Lima, everybody.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited about this event, especially because the manuscript I'm going to read from is called Cosmic Bottom, and it's my new book that I've been working on now for actually a couple of years. So I'll just launch into it. A tear in our hands, a break in the sky. It's not Mars where I want to be buried. It's here with all the jockstrap gods and daddies of the sun, cosmic bottoms who power erosion with light. Somehow I have to say human as I bottom in the dark. In the dark room, bottoming is not galactic, but flight in and out of the void. A bear in his 60s exposes my skies for the community. He makes a third eye blink for my sphincter, the beam of an alien conjured bird-like. To sit on the toilet and meditate from within and without becomes an act of worldly love, the wriggle of a worm pushing out. All shit hinges on how much I open up. I only shed light for the most missionary of tops, he who will nurse me like Rilke whispering, you must charge your hole, you must give them life. Earth and blood and mining dam burst. Lama, it's the mud, it's the mud. Over 300 disappeared dead. The news itself a trickle. Nobody outside the unserious country cares. Nobody inside the unserious countries cares except for Emerson dos Santos, who stands in the debris of his mother's house. It looks like chocolate cake. It looks like a pile of shit. A car lies covered in it. The aerial view helps me see the flood is actually within me. My douche water flushing the streets, a fallen bridge between the bottom and the rest of the world, an overflow of mind souls, because my hole contains multitudes, because this crack of a country is where I was born. I cry and wet the earth and will wet it again and again. The deer here cure me, because the word for deer in Brazilian and Portuguese is also the word for faggot. They're mottled fur, they're clouds of ticks, a rib cage, like a fuckable wall inside of which my guts reverberate. I dream of a single deer on a beach, like the prayer of a world trying to save itself. On a cliff in the blast of the setting sun, an ephemeral waterfall swallows the stars, and like molten lava, the hole in the ozone burns a trail in my guts. So I dive into the ribbon of liquid flame glowing, Sky Daddy's prophecy through my hole goading. The bird on fire inside you is not a poem, but the universe lit up. By your bussy, spark of life from within, by your bussy, the only match for my meltdown. My angel, tell me what planet you're on. The sun leaking from all sides, a flowy skirt purchased On Avenida 9 de Julho, the cloud wisps rosy, purple over time. A wail at the end of the song, like a bird calling out of the ground. Pablo comes to me, bearing gifts from Maranhão, a bowl of açaí on her head, spread out like a peacock, starring the sky, scarring my dick. But you don't need it, Pablo sings to me, using all her light tricks like switchblades, breastless icon against a constellation up high. By the power vested in her, by the might of her muscled thighs, I step midway to Pablo's mid-astral body of light, the sign of the cross in the air, flesh, choreographed in flight. Lunar minerals in her throat, unextractable, to beat the horizon drum-like, to beam vertically and horizontally through the streak of her star. From a bleeding sun to our country of killer transphobes and homophobes, extinct fish swimming in the coral reef of Pablo's heart, unto streams real because imagined. Please help me translate my hole when she cries. I beg Pablo. Meu anjo, Pablo repeats. Me diz em que planeta você está? He kept going for my ass. He kept plowing it, flowering it, unable to resist. His cock so big, it did not fill with blood at first. And then it did. I held on for life, the amniotic, intergalactic surge to be forged. I felt so lucky when he grabbed me from behind and clasped my throat. Deep inside, he pumped like a prayer. Tiny unicorn swimming in my folds, galloping across streams of stars. My love for the world, my love for the current of babies inside me, like a river baptized. I, the crack of the world in that moment of pregnant abyss. Half-blooded song, half-hearted fuck. The crystal dick shines at night. I suck in so much smoke and take chemicals up my hole while trying to write the book of life. I take my body to its limits to restrict the flow of blood to my heart, to force my extremities to grow back wings. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lucas. Up next, we have Ray Ferreira. Ray
Hi,
Ferreira.
everyone.
Hi.
Oh, sorry.
Hi.
Hi.
Ray Ferreira, a performer of sorts. She's a Black Latina from occupied Lenape lands called New York, New York, the illegitimate EEUU. Another space-time mattering material discussive discontinuity, another archipelago, the Caribbean, the Greater Antilles, Hispaniola, the Dominican Republic, another archipelago, Corona, Queens, Brooklyn, Lenape-Hoking. She stays playing, showing work at the Little Island, Performance Space New York, Queens Museum, Brooklyn Museum, Wendy's Subway, and the Knockdown Center. She also received an MFA from Hunter College. Everybody give a warm cyber welcome to Ray Ferreira.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to be reading a constellation of things, something Frankenstein together from a bunch of texts. So here we go. Entra, fall, float, down, tread, descend up a winding wavy path. Directionality stays shifty within the surface, not hard to see. Beneath undulations, forward, not. The twisted threads together, spirals, dispossession, reclamation. And what of these things from whom? In the node of the King Empire, where does beauty lie? Is there potentiality in serving through and undoing beyond? Turned, twirled, spiral, T, here, at an end. Can we enjoy this moment, neither here nor there, on this wavy path, so close to an end? go off, dip in, dive in, drown in, come. Then the world is always so beautiful for those who've caused it. Curtain gives way to wind, through window follows red whale, a constant echo. Feel, wind, eye, light, reverberations through space-time mattering spiral through, mesh. A semi-permeable membrane allows certain fluid flow, sweat, spit, cum, peach, pink, red whales dissolve to strobes, vibrations through water bodies, turn gyrations, femme gestures, cruising amongst the waves of bodies, infinite double-slit experiments, breath on breath, breast meets hand, hand meets crotch, hole to 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 hole. Horrific pleasures mouth made, fantasy. There are things that can only be visible when felt. Gaps in memory are encoded in flesh. Curtain gives way to wind, echo. The present is nothing but an echo embedded in the etymological history, ignoring its futurity. Pre-esse, before being at hand, gesture semiotic slippage marks movement. And how is a world manifested when reach is particularly located? And how is feeling when touch is removed? And how is experience? The surprise of wonder is crucial to how it moves bodies. When movement is restricted, how is possibility differently movable? The spiral beneath feet, feel, light, bright, hot, feel, grain shift beneath losing their particularity, rosé saturated bronze flesh. A song calls forth from whales and laughter into keening of birds. A wavy sensation calls forth networks of knowability that dissolve, rearranging here, then, now, there. Soliferous sac to 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 soliferous sac. Is possibility echo. Porous, porous, truncus, truncae, trench. Un mass demonstrates monstruosidad. El progreso es uno de many simulations. Intento de ser neat y blanqueado. Island to island, when archipelagic mirror connects. NYBR, histories of genocide, histories of extraction, histories of Black and Indigenous murders, and histories of resistance, histories of survival, histories of Black and Indigenous revolt. Island island to island. An archipelagic river connects post-horizon spiral cunt, sites of marinage, deviant of fantasies, stepping out and stucky, pussy popping in the cloud, cruising. Algo para ontológico shifts to paralógico, turns imperiando, las sirenas, si guapo. A particular fantastical movement of skin to blood, produce city bounce fat redistribution haptics, paranormality drifts down beyond bulge, looms across water bodies with an already stimulated border, Kanekalon whips to recursive rhythms through spirals, a lace front fantasy, frontera disuelta, oris, introncare, entran, will translate, become outside, dismembering, carried, momentary deep dive through history becomes monstrous cuts and moves through a monstrous body, expose supposed neatness of flesh-made skin, soliferous sacs grind, bulge, dissolve into the waves, into the depths, beyond white light, dando paso a conocimientos alternos. Una fantasía sentida en vez de unas filtradas a través de un cuerpo estatal estático. Shining. Bioluminescent tresses, poroso inky blue weaves, glitters, cryptic flora. Para sobrevivir, hay que gritar un progressive linealidad, silly idealismos. The spiral can keep the girls alive. Thanks.
Ray, thank you so much. Up next, we have Rebecca Teisch. Rebecca Teisch is a writer, editor, and teacher based in New York, a co-curator of the fall 2018 and 2019 SEG reading series, Artist Space Teaching Poet in Residence 2019 to 2021, and co-founder of the Incarus Syndicate, a queer poetry and performance collective. Teich's work has been featured in No, Dear Magazine, Poets.org, Nightboat Residences, the Poetry Project newsletter, Based Journal, and elsewhere. Teich's first chapbook, Caffeine Chronicles, was published by Portable Press at Yo-Yo Labs. Give it up for Rebecca Teisch, everybody.
Thanks so much, John. And it's truly such a wild, beyond dreams honor to be introduced by you and read alongside Lucas and Ray. Thank you so much for your absolutely mind-blowing readings as usual. So I'm going to read from a piece today. This is like the middle section of a piece that in part is a kind of semi-fictionalized account of different marginal zones of gay mischief, particularly thinking about gradations of risk, and also this idea I've kind of been hunting around a lot, which is the idea of dungeon knowledge production. So yeah, let me get into it. Maybe they expected a swift, obvious arrival into a vast clearing otherworld. Directions do not transcribe distended anticipation. But this was different, spottier. Within the density of trees, suddenly the flash of a naked body, then another, ambling and searching. Threaded between the cross-hashed brush illuminated a mosaic of beach. Between the triangulation of branch, at least 4 legs straight out on thin blankets, spattered with the sand. There, through the trunks, an ass turned side to side, gliding through the water. They set up camp somewhat to the side of where most clumps had their towels lain out. They disrobed. Even within this marginal zone, there were some questioning looks. Certainly, the creekside beach was awash with the bodies of nearly exclusively cis men, while only one in the cohort fell into that particular classification. This garnered stares and a distance not of the state-sanctioned pandemic-aware variety. This is not a description of utopia, nor an attempt to claim these descriptions as utopic. This is a panorama. On a sun-washed rock, one figure swims up to two other figures already perched on it. He reaches up with a meaty hand and, with his pointer and middle finger, playfully twiddles the thick metal ring that runs through the head of one of the cocks on display till it grows and stiffens, the ring pointed to the sun. Turning over in the sand, Y watches the naked figures who traipse through the shadowed woods, slightly inward from the bank. She sees two recursive figures, one kneeling and one standing, begs the question, is it 6 feet between one's cock and the other's mouth? Y is not making direct comparisons, nor trying to elide the very different histories in thinking this question. The question only notes the continual return of certain kinds of questions among populations trying to figure out how to stay alive amidst pervasive neglect. It's not ones and zeros, no risk and risk. That seems clear enough, at least at this point. But maybe the place at which we learn about risk is a secret place, a place kept secret, kept from, hidden within, navigated through the brush or in the after hours. Collective visions of each other, public-private data points. Take inventory of the moments of reckoning. That was a misstep that felt so fucking good, and I'm never doing that again, under such and such conditions, again. X thinks about shame, X feels shame. X thinks about deep loss, X feels deep loss. X is in no position to make broad sweeping claims, or maybe they are and just choose not to. There have been moments in their life where they can only narrate events, and other moments in which that too feels like revealing too much, asserting too much. So instead, they map out a framework without a framework. Meticulously track and catalog their movements, keep an inventory of loved ones, notice things in the street and in the woods. Left the house maybe twice this week, saw no one they know in the flesh in 8 days. Was invited to an outdoor distance fire pit gathering in 4 days, but want to touch W later in the week, and their protocol regimes are tighter. It's almost diagrammatic, but there's no guarantees, no given alignment that dictate measures of necessity. Eradicate the dream that in these improvisatory movements, as each moment is, one could honestly reach out and point to say that there is goodness, rightness, and that there is badness, wrongness. When all one has are the cross-hatched etchings of the movements of oneself and those that surround in different proximities, intimacies. These are how and what we can know. To what extent does one identify with the term neighborliness? X rests their head on Y's stomach, borrows her stolen Dior sunglasses to stare at the sky. People have been spending a lot of time saying how things are like and are unlike the past. What are the things you need to survive between food, water, shelter? So many hands grazing, mouths grazing. Is this freely given? At least more so than in other semi-publics. Fresh stain of blood spatter on the wall is more than anyone could ask for. If it's a collage, is it fiction? So knitted into the surrounds that even the subtle shifts in temperature and sunlight give way to a sense of time and turn without a watch. Spliced here too is the controversy of this text's own writing. It isn't unrustled and easy to write on and from a pandemic as if one understands, as if one has answers, as if one has authority. But the sheer disorientation of writing a world that feels farther and farther away from the present and foreseeable future world, more and more a part of a historical past to a degree yet to be known, boils over. This is not an excuse. This is also not permission. Slowly, they submerged their bodies into the swimming hole and lifted their feet and glided. The first time X and Y saw each other after the large swath of quarantine-induced separation felt like a fawn learning to walk. So much desire overrun and totally unprepared with how to direct it, like it'd been so fucking long. In this moment, naked on a rock, trying to catch tiny fish in their hands, they're still living in the enduring torsions of this long. Samuel Delany says, what we say we do or say we should do is often hugely at odds with what we do. Likewise, what we wish and what we are compelled to do have often been in equal tension, end quote. He's speaking most directly about the force exerted by the HIV/AIDS crisis on, quote, the social market where language, desire, and lived experience have all functioned at great intensities and often function in opposition, end quote. In a dearth of information, because they want to mitigate PR, not harm, people alive and affected have to reckon with the routes and wantings of many who are subjected but never subjects. Slippages abound in making and articulating these improvisatory grounds. Bottom-up networks of information to become one's own studiers and test subjects, knowing only the dregs and the incompleteness of what one can say one is able to know. And what of the twists and triangulations of language, desire, and lived experience that arise uniquely so under moments of heightened duress, that inaugurate further social division? Enter into another tableau, months and months later, after vaccination which shifted some sort of terrain, on New Year's Day, 3 notorious brutal tops and a notorious top ally sat on a couch discussing the ways they felt pariahed and the other ways in which flourishing, unexpected entanglements emerged. 2 of the brutal tops, X and U, were dykes who had, during the height of the pandemic, found themselves in intimate relation with fags. This, to them, felt entirely distinct from heterosexuality, this fag for dyke paradigm, and had both logical and historical precedents. Both the pandemic and shame have isolating and communalizing effects. Jokingly, they drew the distinction between the lesbian sodomite and the domestic lesbian. Humor arises at the point at which acronymized taxonomies fail us. It also dawned on them that in their casual sex life, they'd all but cease to have vanilla sex, instead having forms of encounter seen as high risk, or even not as sex, but violence, even criminal, sodomy and blood play. Yet it was exactly these individuals who, sure, were open to these encounters, but also who were insistent on negotiation as unburdened by shame as possible. Sexuality became about those who are already used to conversation, who already rely on dug-up wisdom, forms of knowledge that precede the CDC's legitimization, or which are seen as their dead opposite, as untruth, because of the gloss of the act and the individuals. How long have you been into needle play? Can I leave a scar? Are you on PrEP? Do you want me to bruise you and where? When were you last tested? Are you allergic to latex? What's the most you've taken before? Do you want to go farther? Back to that still late summer panorama over a year earlier at the shoreline, one man lays on his back, legs spread and hands cradling his head as another takes him in his mouth, a hand slid under his ass. He bobs his head slowly, slowly. It seems to go on forever. The economies of exhaustion and valorization, as in when is this touch right or wrong, as in the particular decorum of a thin sliced place and time, seeing a you that you've never before met in person, ascend the stairs, cross the threshold, take off a mask, bend over. Proliferated justifications like, I have done enough, I'm so fucking worn out, I've worked so hard, I've done the appropriate preparation, I've been through enough, I've earned something, I want to give something I know how to give, I'm depleted and in pain, swirl around in the aftermath of the encounter, linger on the tongue in case the secret is told, and therein ensues disciplinary interrogation. The encounter ends, the still of the room holding bodies as it were ever before, shakes and shatters as a mask is put back on, the theater of hand sanitizer squirted on before heading back out into the night. Yes, always at some point the frame breaks. Each frame knows it will break. It's a skill to know when to arrive and when to slip away. Break out of the panorama and back into the fiction of implotment. What now into what next? They shook off the sand and dried themselves, sharing 2 towels, awkwardly clothed, and turned away from the shore and back to the woods. They performed their rituals of collective and individual upkeep, returned to the shack with eucalyptus leaves dotting the floor, feed themselves, wrap themselves in warm blankets, share impressions and recollections, select a campy movie. At night, they sip their dream juice. There's no outside, but there are many returns. There are no returns, but there are many improvisations. Each day confronting the through lines that held this earth so blisteringly in its grasp. Each day the invention of a new world, endlessly in the fallible imaginaries of troves and wanting, together and alongside and through. May well they turn and turn and turn. Thank you.
Thank you, Becca. Thanks, everybody. Honestly, thank you to all my readers. It's like an embarrassment of riches. I feel like a greedy bottom soaking in all this beautiful material that pertains to this idea of hOle theory. So yeah, I mean, I had like some like, template questions that I wanted to kick off like the discussion with, or the discourse, but like holes, there's a lot of love, there's a lot to love, there's a lot to hate, there's a lot to explore. I like the idea of an open-ended question around like what the idea of hole theory means to each of you subjectively, and like if anyone wants to take point on diving into that, I feel like that's the best way to start. I don't want to have too assertive or too top like a question for the three of you. So if there's anyone interested in really just being the power bottom in this situation, I would truly enjoy it. I also have to note that there's, including myself, 3 Sagittariuses involved in this event, which I don't think I planned incidentally. Perhaps unconsciously, but not incidentally. So, if no one wants to really to come through with the idea of like what the whole means to their own practice, I could ask a more pointed question.
I can say something. Maybe it's about like being permeable, being, open, obviously, receptive. These are all, I think, words to think about, so that, it has all these different registers. It's not beyond the sexual, but in all of, I think, the work that I heard today, mine included, obviously, like the sexual or the erotic is there, and is not, it's not like abstracted away. It's very embodied. Yeah.
I think in your work in particular, Lucas, it's embodied in like a very astral or like cosmic way. And there's this like a continuing theme of transformation through this idea of a conduit or a channel or a hole, that I find pretty pertinent to talk about. Like this idea of the hole as a means of divination is something that I see pretty prominently in your work. I'm not sure if you'd be willing to speak more about that.
Yeah, because it's like, it's a portal too, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think in Ray's work, that was very activated. Like I felt like I was right in that threshold the whole time, for example. And then in Rebecca's work, it was like, there was it was almost like, I guess it really sat in that space of frustration of not being able to get through. That was one of the things that came up for me in the last reading.
I like that idea of a clogged hole for Rebecca's work. I feel like that that feels pretty much something that we were talking about, Rebecca and I, in terms of the idea of plugging and fixing the hole could be seen as a strategy of assimilation for queer people. And like, how do we expose and interrogate these fault lines without necessarily attempting to seal them? And maybe we could deviate towards Rebecca for that.
Always happy to talk about plugging holes. Yeah, well, I think that Lucas in particular, when you said embodied and transformative, I feel like there's such a necessary tension living there, where embodied, it's something that already exists. Like we have these things, they exist, but also there's this shift or like learned aspect to it. I think particularly as queer people, we have to learn new technologies of sex, and we're endlessly learning new technologies of sex. If not learning them, we're inventing them. So I think that that's something I'm really interested in. Particular, like there's a whole great history of like the rise and fall and rise again of like anal fisting within as like marked in across different points in time, which I think is both this thing that is seemingly pre-existing, but also intersects with moments of crisis in ways that I think are really fascinating, and definitely converge with, John and I have talked about this, but they're within, I think hOle also has a lot to do with history, and like the title suggests, gaps and omissions. What do we do with intentionally suppressed histories? How do we grapple with the loss of an archive that isn't there or maybe wasn't there, and the brutalities of the reasons why it's not there, why it was eradicated, and the kind of, you know, maybe liberal answer is, well, plug it in, represent, like, yay. And I think that instead there can be like a dynamism of the whole that presents itself as whole and then becomes filled and then not, some kind of expansion and contraction, ongoing transformation that is resisting both the initial, like the originary violences of omission, but also resisting discernible forms of plugging it up, or which itself, you know, when is like plugging it up its own kind of erasure. So yeah, like within my text, I was thinking a lot about these kind of like lost places, lost histories, as well as the rest of it. Yeah.
Yes, you're
Maybe
advocating.
like a presence and absence at the same time.
Yeah, and I think all the effects are off on the shit or whatever. Anyway, I was thinking about, like a hole can be like a receptacle, can be something that can one can slip into and fall into, but can also be something that can like ooze and things can emerge from. So
Well, Ray, we can kind of transition into talking about your work. I think a lot of what really captivates me about your work and the idea of hOle poetics is like these porosities and this idea of slippage. And I think glitch comes to mind as like kind of like a device to think of when thinking of hOle poetics, but also like, I think out of the three readers, you had the most tangibly interdisciplinary practice or interdisciplinary presentation, and thinking about the idea of interdisciplinary practice as advocating for hOle theory or advocating as for a way to bridge these gaps or to offer an active conduit. I was wondering if you could think about, or if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, no, slippage is super important to me. I mean, I think back to this idea of a hole, like it's something that could be like straddled and we can sit within for a while, something that we can come in and out of, and thinking about, you know, I'm not always, but I'm sometimes working in like English and Spanish, which allows, or English is and Spanish is like to say, which allows for certain new meanings to emerge from the gap that exists there. Yeah, what else? Yeah, and then also in thinking about sort of the way that I can use, just like physically, that I can try to play around with my voice and and create some sounds, create like new gaps in that, create play with a vocal fry. Yeah.
Ooh, that's interesting. Vocal fry is like a signifier for what is lost or what is absent, is interesting to me.
It's like my favorite thing.
It's my favorite thing too. I think that, so for, as you may or may not know about my own personal work, is a lot of it revolves around extended vocal technique and like kind of exploring porosities between text and archival omissions through experimenting with the voice. So that resonates with me in a big way. But I also think hOle is ritual, or like hOle worship, or like kind of applies to the three of you in a communal way and in like a subjective way. But also the idea that we're doing this through a Zoom format kind of speaks to that dichotomy of the hOle as alienation versus connectivity. I guess my question is like, is there a ritualistic aspect to each of your practices that that feels reified through this idea of hOle poetics?
I mean, I think in some ways, there is like formally, I would say that this idea of like sort of diving in and out becomes ritualistic through repetition sometimes. And also I think there's something like really wonderful and worth worshiping in the ability to play around with languages, like both like this material thing, but then also this material thing that is very like heavy and sits in ideology, and becomes like a place to like play with how those things influence each other.
That could bring me to an idea of like the typographical versus the conceptual in terms of like what a whole is in poetry, as well as like an interdisciplinary practice, like how they inform each other, how they don't inform each other, what the slippage is between those two paradigms. Rebecca, I feel like a lot with your work, there's like an adherence to inscrutability or anonymity, but at the same time, you're thinking about this framework or this infrastructure that is, it's almost like the anonymity can be a strategic or rebellious advantage to the frameworks that you're discussing or that you're naming or condemning.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that I am a chronically cerebral person in some ways. And I mean, part of this project was thinking, it turned towards thinking about forms of bonding that happen through outlaw sexuality. So like thinking about, the bifurcation of the like lesbian sodomite versus the domestic lesbian, like these actually become very real and very different categories that have very different relationships to like social acceptance or even, like disciplining of various kinds. And so I was interested in the like both push away and pull into different community forces that happen along that. And part of that does have to do with like anonymous sexual encounters and how that may or may not relate to an ethics of encounters with strangers, an ethics of like some momentary portion of care for someone who you don't know, who you don't recognize, who you don't know the name of. And so what might that mean for the reader to have that experience with different narrators? So the text has like kind of an very I guess stripped away narrator, and then a lot of different characters that you only know via the letter. And yeah, I think I'm at like 8 or 9 characters or something like that you only know through the letter. And so that has a kind of sterility to it that the reader can have this kind of brief anonymous encounter with a character. It's also like one of my first times playing with character, so that's really new for me. But yeah, the ethics of like anonymous encounter and how that can extend towards a question of neighborliness or commitment, I think becomes really important in my work.
And these like networks of care that exist through gaps in like hegemonic structure.
Oh yeah, and the whole thing I talk a lot about is against the couple form. I'm not entirely against I've softened a little bit over the years, but yeah. So part of that is, what if you have a text that is not about where all the networks of intimacy, care, sex, entanglement don't exist within the immediate nuclear family, don't exist within the couple form, and predominantly don't exist within the household. So it's like these outside forces that happen, and there's yeah. So that was also an important part.
So I will say that like a minor epiphany that's happening for me right now during this discussion is like the idea of I think we're talking about the whole collectively as more of an active space than I might have anticipated. And I think the idea of like the whole as a kinetic space is really interesting in Lucas's work in particular, in terms of like the scatological or the utilitarian and how it relates to the ecological or the alchemical even. And I'm wondering, Lucas, if you could talk about that a little bit more, because I feel like there is a scatological impulse in your work that is very kinetic, but it relates to, I think, mysticism in a really interesting way for me. If you'd care to talk about that.
Yeah, I think I mean, this book is like, my books kind of all connect. And the first two are very much about grief. Like the first one is very personal grief that then extends to HIV and AIDS. The second one is about Brazil, where I'm from, and colonialism and activating grief more collectively right away. And then this one, it was like, I wasn't an animal anymore. In the first two, I'm a bird. And so there's this like fall into the ground to become a hole from the sky. And that's always the place I like to start from. I think like it's important to be humble in poetry. I think the forces of poetry the magnitude of poetry is something to be recognized and respected. And that's how I work through that and kind of honor that, I think. So starting from that kind of abject place is really important for me. And that is actually like when we talk about expansion, like assuming this like very peripheral place that then actually is able to have scale. And so for me, the cosmic bottom and that play of words between, the cosmic and then this like this absent presence, emptiness, the void, etc. It's important to like be able to toggle kind of back and forth in that scale. And I think like it's just like follow the impulses that I've always had, which is like to profane the sacred, I think is really powerful, and to make the turn the profane into the sacred, which is where I think, yeah, like the shit comes in and grotesque. And yeah, I think it's like trusting that as like a, a very queer impulse. Like the first thing that comes to mind is Piss Christ, the Serrano piece, but so many other artists and writers and such. And yeah, I think it's like, it's a way of working through what is kind of illegible, I guess is what I would say, right? Because you're kind of rupturing that idea of like what is sanctioned and what is not, and you're sort of just mucking everything up in a way so that it's really a way to create, for me, my own world in the poems.
Yeah, the idea of like transvaluation from like Jean Genet or the contact encounters from like Samuel Delany comes through loud and clear from what you just said for me. And then Ray, I think there's also like an environmental or an ecological strain in your work that I want to talk to you a little bit more about, because there is this idea of like modified biology or like posthumanism that I think, yeah, I just want to hear you talk about that a little bit more in the piece that I heard you read.
Yeah, I mean, I think also that sort of also relates to, I think, if I'm not mistaken, everything I write is probably written in a way that it's unclear to tell like where the person is. There's like it could be potentially, one could insert a first person, one could insert some other personage, one could insert themselves. Yeah, and the interesting thing about the tech is that it's always present in the space, even though it creates a distance between like what my body can do without this little piece of tech and what it can do with it. And I think in terms of it sort of mirrors some of the stuff I'm doing with language, where like I'm thinking about the outdoors, or something that's like outside of a particular threshold, something that's within a threshold. in a body, like our holes being that sort of like undefinable space that is both within and without. Thinking about trenches as being a space where things are unknown, but things still exist. All of that.
I'm not sure. Has anyone seen the film recently that just came out that everyone's loving, that I had negative opinions about, Everything Everywhere All at Once?
You didn't
No.
like it?
Oh my God. This is like the story where like everyone's like so mad at me. I'm getting picketed for not liking this movie. I didn't hate it. It's just like, it's interesting to talk about like a hole being very present in like the popular imaginary right now for this workshop, and like being like the multiverse being commodified in a way, and also a film that like deals with this idea of queer villainy, but for me personally in a very chuggy and mawkish way. I didn't hate it. If no one else has seen it besides me and you, I'm not sure if it makes much sense to talk about, but I don't want to, without spoiling anything, there's this whole idea that this character who's like a villainess of the multiverse can create this nihilistic everything bagel that is a void with like an ontological parasite essentially that sucks everything in. And like, I just want to change the name of the film to like Nothing, Nowhere, Never Again, because that would have worked better for my idea of what we're talking about with hole theory. But either way, that's really just a wild digression. I don't know, do you have anything to say about that, Ray?
No, except that the sort of like everything bagel sort of like maybe is like this, it plays with this like interesting way in which like it's kind of like hard to define a whole without talking about what's around it.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, we can I think that could be the final sentiment of the evening, is this idea of how do we navigate this lack, and can a lack exist, or can a whole exist without being part of a larger infrastructure, or have we come to a point in our poetics or like in our zeitgeist where do we have like a postmodern whole, a whole that exists without precedent? Is the idea of the universe like a whole within a whole within a whole, or is that just like a whole? And I know that Lucas, I think that you deal with the iconography of the chicken in your work, so I'm not sure if this is like a chicken or the egg question for you.
I don't know how to answer that, except that I guess I would think about, I wrote my dissertation about spirit possession. So what you're saying makes me think about how in all kinds of possession religions, right, both Afro-diasporic and like spiritism coming from Cardis's spiritism from France, like having a spirit come down, you have to be emptied out, right, to have something come down and to feel that presence. So I would never say that like it's just always just a whole is the void.
That speaks to the ontology of the douche water that was in your piece as well, I think.
Yeah, totally.
Well, that feels like a fun enough note to end on. Thank you everybody so much. I'm like so thrilled. Thank you, Lucas. Thank you, Ray. Thank you, Becca. Thank you, New Orleans Poetry Festival, for carving this commodious and gaping space for us to revel in the joys of the void. So I appreciate it, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and hopefully we can ponder the depths again soon together.
That was great. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. Looking forward to seeing you here.
Oh yeah, I'm looking forward to it too. If you have any recs in the meanwhile, let me know.
Okay.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Night.